Welcome to Susie's Las Vegas Lifestyles. I'm so excited. My next guest is Dr. Larry Barton. I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time. Hi, Larry. How are you?
Thank you so much, Susie.
Welcome to the show.
I appreciate you having me.
There's so much to talk about. I don't know what to start first with.
Well, let's go. I'm ready. Okay.
Well, you've spent 35 years in crisis situations. Can you elaborate more on this?
Sure. Well, I was a young professor at UNLV, and I was teaching crisis management. And then students started to ask me, I work at this hotel where there's been a problem, or I have a parent who may be working in some factory where they've had a disaster. And then eventually, make a long story short, October 16th, 1991, I was writing my first book, and there was a shooting in Texas at a Luby's cafeteria. So I was writing my first book. I was writing my first textbook. I called the editor and I said, is there any way that you could get me $1,000? I'd like to go down to Texas and see the tragedy that's unfolding and talk to people. And she was so kind and said, absolutely. And to make a long story short, that was my introduction to moving from crisis management into the horrible issue of workplace violence, the issues of stalking and how people and why people misbehave at work. But I was able to interview the CEO and many of the victims and learn a lot about what happens when a horrible thing happens to a really good business. So it's been a long, long journey, and now I work with companies all over the world.
Wow. Luby's.
Who would think? 151 restaurants at the time. Yeah. Almost all of us, we don't want to admit it, have eaten at a Luby's.
Well, sure.
It's a great little restaurant.
Yeah.
But they had never had this happen. And the CEO, I'll never forget, was such a genuine of heart person that he said, he was with his board actually in San Antonio when they got the phone call. And he said, I need to be there. And he got on a private plane. And on the plane ride down, he actually asked that there be psychologists and victims advocates and comfort dogs for people that had witnessed the unfathomable.
Oh my God.
And, over a dozen people were murdered that day in a restaurant. So the whole point is
How many people?
Over a dozen people, yeah. Nobody thinks that it will ever happen to them until it does. And that first case was right after the postal shootings. And you're enough to remember, the issues of the postal shootings that had happened. So this was in the early 1990s, we were starting to see both in the public sphere, in restaurants, we were seeing it in supermarkets. And now, unfortunately, last year in the United States, you ready for this? We had 656 mass shootings.
656?
Yeah, so think about that, Susie. That's almost 2 a day. We're going to have 4 people shot. A mass shooting now, I teach at the FBI Academy, a mass shooting is 4 victims. And we're having that happen almost twice a day in the United States. So this is an issue that is only becoming more serious as time goes by.
Wow. I can't wrap my head around 656 mass shootings.
Yes, and the issue I think that a lot of people don't think about is, if it were to happen to you, small business, you have a bakery, you have a construction company, it's not always going to be at a massive corporation. But if it's a small business, they don't have an HR department.
No.
They don't have employee counselors that can come and counsel their victims. And so we've learned a lot about how a small business can still respond. What if a woman who works for you is being stalked by her ex-boyfriend or a husband? What if somebody is threatening your CEO? They have executive protection if they're a serious, major.
Sure.
It could be a star. It could be somebody in the entertainment industry here in Las Vegas. Most of the entertainers on the Strip have executive protection. Mm-hmm. But if you're running a small business, you don't have executive protection. You may have a security alarm on your house if you're lucky. Wow. So we've learned a lot about, and think about our kids. Our kids in school are being taught in the first grade, if you see something, say something.
Sure.
Our kids in the first grade nationwide, ready for this? 91% of first graders are taught to run, hide, or fight. And that says a lot, that if we can be talking to our kids about this, we can be talking about it in a place of work. So whether it's an airline or a technology company, whatever, and it's a global issue. This is
Sure.
not, we beat ourselves up, I think, as Americans by just saying, oh, this is an American issue because of guns. There's workplace violence around the world. In some countries, it's not reported, like China. Other countries, like Japan, very peaceful country, very few guns. But you have others that are just growing in nature as people have more mental illness, depression. There's just a lot of factors that play a role.
When you look at this, I mean, the big picture of this, I mean, it's just amazing.
It is, because when you think about, again, any company, any organization, and that includes nonprofits and universities, and we can talk about what happened at UNLV
Sure,
here if
that's
you're
what I
interested.
want to talk about.
Sure. But, we can tell you scientifically, good empirical research, and I'm a scholar, I'm a professor at the University of Central Florida, and 1% of all of our workers have schizophrenia. They're not bad people. Schizophrenia is actually a brain disorder. And it doesn't mean they'll be violent. It's just somebody that we have to work with, and if they stay on their medication plan, they can be among our very best employees. What's interesting is they have a very high IQ, so they tend to be incredibly good citizens.
Wow.
About 4.5% of all the employees in the world, all adults, 17 to 64 years of age, typically have bipolar disorder. So again, as long as they stay on their therapy plan, they can be wonderful, hardworking people. Where it gets interesting is the person that we don't know is not well, who may have left the place of employment. So they no longer work for your hotel, your restaurant. They no longer work at your bank. And those are the ones that have a grievance. So I often say the most dangerous person in the workplace is called the grievance collector. They have a grievance that they haven't told you about, or they have told. They file lawsuits, they file with all kinds of agencies.
Sure.
So always be mindful that sometimes people will create a violent act without warning you, but in other cases, Susie, they tell you. They tell you on blogs, on Slack, in an email. They'll actually come to your place of business and create a scene. So it's it's a serious topic.
And a lot of times people don't pay attention to it until it's too late.
They don't. People think, oh, he's just a jerk. Oh, she's always been depressed. Oh, those bruises on her body, she puts those on her own body just to get time off.
Wow.
How many women are actually going to do that? The majority of women who come in with a black eye or bruised by a husband or a partner, they're somebody who is a victim. And that's why we need human resources and the security teams to lean in privately.
Sure.
Not in front of us. How are you? Talk to me. How can we help? Because if we can save a life, if we can, she's worried about her kids. Mm-hmm. She's afraid she's going to be fired.
Sure.
Because if she comes out and says, I want you to know my husband was in the parking lot this morning, the guy thinks I'm seeing somebody. If she does that, many companies will find a way to get rid of her. So
instead of taking care of what's really going on.
Right. And have you talked to the police? Have you thought about a battered women's shelter? Have you thought about a protective order? Have you thought about talking with somebody? So we have an opportunity, and there's really good news in this, as sad a subject as it is. The good news is employers are getting better. Police departments are getting better. We have more victim support, more employee assistance programs. So there's a lot of progress being made, but I worry about the business who really does believe in denial. Not my people. These people have been with me 25 years. We're like family. You're not like family. When it comes to the workplace, don't ever say, we're like family. Because I don't know about your family, Susie, but I got a couple I'm worried about.
Mine too.
All right?
Mine too.
Every family has one or two. Dean Martin used to say that in his shows here in Las Vegas. He said, I don't know about your family, but I got a couple in my family. And there's truth to that.
Well,
right?
sure.
Right?
Absolutely. Well, here in Las Vegas, we've had the Mandalay Bay shooting.
Yes.
And, there's been dozens of people that were injured, people killed.
Yes.
UNLV, tell me your thoughts on this.
Well, it's very different. I'm glad you asked. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
It's a very different response that I have. The first would be in terms of Mandalay Bay. Not only was it a chaotic event, obviously, and it was not preventable. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever in the police reports that anybody would have known that Paddock had planned what he planned. But when you murder 60 people and then you injure almost 800, and you think about the expansive property that he had rented in terms of his space, bringing private bags into the hotel.
Yeah.
Let's put that aside in terms of the human tragedy, which is so profound. What bothers me is that the response by the police was largely criticized, as you know. The on-site guards, Metro, Clark County, it was clunky. It could have been more coordinated. And for a wonderful company, did they rehearse? Did they practice? These are the questions that came out in litigation.
Right.
And it was a messy, messy situation. But if you lost your sister, or I lost my son, if we lost anybody at that, you have the question of what did they know? When did they know it? What did they do about it? Well, in this case, candidly, it was impossible to prevent. But they had every opportunity, once they knew there was a shooter, to be more coordinated, better radios, get to the scene. They knew roughly what floor, get there and get your butt up there fast, and go in and intervene. And we've learned now, especially after Uvalde, the school shooting in Texas, we said people were sitting outside as children were being murdered. So the analogy between the two may be extreme, but it's not that. So Mandalay Bay was a mess, just in terms of the questions that I always ask myself. Did they rehearse enough? Could they have done more to practice?
Right.
Now we go to UNLV, last December 6th. From the moment the first shot, by the way, I used to teach in that building.
You did?
I did. I taught on the third floor.
In the same building?
Same building. I taught on the same floor.
Oh, my God.
Third floor where the shooting began, and then he moved. The response was less than 10 minutes. They had neutralized that shooter. And in his case, guess what? Again, there was no knowledge that he would come in. Now, he had applied for at least a dozen jobs. At least a dozen times he had been turned down. And he had a hit list.
He had a hit list?
Yes. The estimate is somewhere between, we'll find out as this goes on, somewhere between 12 to 17 people. But he actually had put the photos of the professors on cards. Think about it like a baseball card.
Oh, my God.
Of people he intended to kill because he had been turned down for so many jobs. So again, we come back to the grievance. Now, what I am so proud of the police, I have to say the UNLV police, the Metro, all of them, the coordinated response. The fact that they neutralized him and killed him within 10 minutes is stunning.
Yes.
Think about if he had gone onto the courtyard. Think about if he had gone into a classroom where students are not prepared. So it's a good example in this city where you can have, let's just say, clunky response by police. And granted, it was a horrible situation with thousands of people scattered. But in other cases, and I'm very proud because we don't think enough about our universities and colleges. They're equally vulnerable. So
sure.
I try to compare different cases and say, the police, can you imagine walking into that situation, putting your life at risk to something you don't know who the shooter is, if they have one gun or two, maybe no gun, maybe it's a plastic gun. They're in a horrible situation, even in Mandalay Bay.
Right.
People criticize them. Some of the criticism was justified, but in other cases, it was not.
No.
So it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. But what I try to say is be prepared, have a plan, have a simulation, and realize that we need to connect dots. See, the question at UNLV,
Right.
when somebody applies for a job 10, 12, 15 times, and they're denied,
There's a reason.
there's a reason. There's a reason he was denied.
Yeah.
And did anybody ever talk to the guy and say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed on campus. We're concerned for you. Here's who you may want to talk to, some
Sure.
resource. And you know what? Everybody's mum. I want answers.
Well,
And if
sure.
you lost your husband or you lost your wife in that shooting,
You'd wanna know.
you want to know,
Right.
why did they choose my husband, my wife, my kid?
Right.
Right? Why were they selected? And it appears so far to have been random, but we're going to find out as time goes by.
Yeah. That is really, I mean, wow.
It's creepy.
Yeah, it is. You have a very interesting job, don't you,
I
Larry?
love what I do.
I'll bet you do.
When a company calls and says, Dr. Barton, can you help us? We have somebody who's struggling. Maybe it's mental illness or depression or somebody who has brought a weapon to work and they really innocently did not mean to. They forgot it was in their pocketbook. She's worried about coming to work. I love helping them because if we can save a life, we can save a career and a lot of wonderful. Have you ever had a bad day? Can I ask you that?
Sure. We all have.
Have I ever had a bad day? Many,
Absolutely.
right? But you never thought about killing anyone.
No.
And that's the issue, is that a lot of the calls that I get are about really wonderful people that are just having a bad day. In other cases, they're really wonderful people that have become evil. And they're posting horrible things about their coworkers or their boss on the web. And now with AI, you can take imagery, obviously, and create we see that with our
Well,
kids.
sure we can.
The sex issues that are going
Yeah.
on. Taking a 14-year-old girl and posting her photo to all of her classmates. So with AI, we now have to look at not just behavior and statements, but we now have to look at technology. So I love what I do because I'm learning every day
Well, sure.
as the world.
It's a new world.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a threat matrix. It's always in change.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. We hear about workplace violence where the employers, what are the employers doing to make it safer? Can you tell me?
They're doing a lot. The good ones are doing a lot. There are still some that are completely in the clouds. But many of them are doing better background checks to make sure that the person actually worked where they said they worked. That's kind of
Well, that's the big
there's a
thing.
fundamental, right?
Absolutely.
So they actually do a background check.
Yeah.
They're doing more than one interview. Anybody can charm you during an interview. Anybody can
Well, sure.
anybody can put on a 15-minute great act and
Right.
I'll be the single best engineer. I'll be the single best, financial. Okay. So better background checks, making sure the person's social networking history shows that they're a good citizen. Now, they don't have to be doing the Pledge of Allegiance, but you want to make sure they don't, if they're posting on there with a gun,
Right.
maybe we're going to pass on that person.
Yeah.
Now, if they have a legal reason to do it and they enjoy hunting, I'm not bothered by that at all.
Right,
So we
right.
don't want to make a judgment based on just that.
Absolutely.
But I think the interview process is better. But what they're doing is most companies now have what's called a threat assessment team. And what that means is that when a threat comes in, they have security, human resources, and the law department talk it out. Why is this person acting irrationally? Why are they potentially yelling and screaming on the floor? It's a call center, and there's 300 people, and they
Right.
have a breakdown. They have an
Sure.
emotional breakdown. So the threat assessment team has to basically do an intermediary Band-Aid of let's get them support and help. They typically call me, and then I become part of the team and try to get to the root cause. And you know what's interesting is sometimes it's a day off. The person's going through a divorce. We don't realize their house is on a lien. We don't realize that their car was taken the night before by the bank. And so part of this is that all of that, plus having a threat assessment team and training. The last one I would say, Susie, is the more a company can do training. Like we don't realize in many of the retailers, can you imagine working in a retail environment right now? The grab and go, the punks, the idiots who come in and grab and knock down an end cap, say foul things to an hourly worker, trying to make a living at $17 an hour. Retail is hot.
Yes.
And I'm very proud of the retailers. We've created a whole series of videos to help them with
Oh, that's
disgruntled.
good.
It's huge.
That is absolutely wonderful.
And like your webcast, what's interesting about your
Yeah.
podcast, they're conversational. Don't
Yeah.
lecture people.
No, people-
Just talk to them about,
Yeah.
hey, if you're uncomfortable, speak to your manager.
Yeah.
If you need to call 911, you call 911. If you
Right.
see somebody who's doing something dangerous, we're not able inside of this store, but the police can. So
Sure.
the companies are actually doing a lot of really progressive things.
Oh, that's wonderful. You're definitely needed in all these different things
Oh.
that you do.
Thank you.
But 91 is when you started.
I started in 90. Well, I actually started back in 87, but my first book was in 91. And now 5
Wow.
books later, I just keep learning and writing and researching. And I'm very proud when I go to Quantico to work with the Bureau and to help FBI agents. Because when you think about it, these are the cream of the
Oh,
crop.
yeah.
But I try to help them understand some of these issues because they don't really deal with workplace issues
Right.
until after the fact. So if I can help them understand when they send in an agent or a group of agents and they're all in body armor, they have to understand the dynamic that they're walking into. So
Yeah.
it's a real privilege.
What is your most, Larry, if you don't mind me asking, what is your most interesting thing that's happened to you since you started?
Wow.
What do you go back to?
Yeah. I would say the one that, it's actually a recent case, the one that bothers me the most is a phenomenally talented woman who had 14 years of service at a company and a very devoted employee. And she began to have a serious mental health decline. And it was very puzzling to all of us in terms of why. And having interviewed her and caring about her, thank God she works for that company, because they have done everything possible. It's actually a very recent case, but I would say it's probably the most chilling in a long time, because she can present herself just beautifully, but she's living in a torment.
Really?
But the great news is they are getting her all kinds of clinical support.
Oh, that's good.
So that's really, really good. This one at UNLV kind of rocked me, to be honest.
I'm
because,
sure it did.
I mean, it happened 11 feet from my
You know
office.
the whole area.
So I'm like, that could have been me, right?
Yeah.
And so those things certainly haunt me. And then I would say the third that is important that we always remember the past would be the Boston Marathon shooting.
Oh,
When two brothers, just took out innocent people running across the line.
yeah.
And they were terrorists and they were extremists. And they were people that were obviously out to create mass havoc. But again, it was unbelievable police and civilian response that brought them down. And if you remember, one of the brothers went on a chase for a couple of days
Yes.
into Cambridge and Waltham, Massachusetts. And that case is important because what reminds you is it's not always an employee. It could be an extremist. It could be a terrorist. And they're coming into this country every day. They're coming in from Mexico. They're coming in from Venezuela. They're coming from a lot of different countries.
Right.
And we're not vetting those people. And they're going to morph into society, including the Chinese. And I worry in the future about, we have to get our hands around this quickly.
I would think so.
These borders are completely open. They are completely unsecure. And this is not a political discussion at all. It's a question of what are we walking into 5, 10, 15 years from now?
Right.
So there's a lot of dimensions to this that even if with the best policies or the best training or the best videos, you have to be ready for the Boston bomber. So those are the things that we think about too.
That's you lived up in that area, didn't you, at one time?
I did. I lived in Boston. I grew up in Boston. And even in where I live now in Florida, we had a shooting at the Pulse nightclub, a gay nightclub.
Oh, I remember that.
Horrible. Absolutely horrific. And I spent a lot of time with the first responders, the police officers. And you know, when you're a cop, you might see a really bad auto accident.
Right.
See bodies mangled. I mean, when you're a cop, you see the worst. Ambulance drivers, our nurses,
Sure.
they see the worst. But when you're a police officer, nobody had ever in Orlando PD ever come
Yeah.
into a nightclub and seen dozens of young people dying and others struggling for breath. And you think about, and the gunman, again a terrorist, who was savvy enough, very deviant in terms of where he positioned himself, so
Right.
no SWAT team really had a chance to get at him. Eventually they had to crash through the back wall.
Is that how they did it?
That's how they did it. They crashed through the back wall. And I interviewed the lieutenant who had to
Oh,
make the
my
call
goodness.
and said, we're not winning this war. We got to win now. Back wall, go through. That's a lot better than Uvalde, where a bunch of people just sat around and heard kids screaming, heard teachers screaming, and did nothing. And I hold every single one of them accountable.
Well, I don't blame
Shame
you.
on them,
Yes.
and we've got to learn from these lessons because, you know, it's a beautiful country. It's a wonderful country, and Americans are patriotic. I believe in the right to bear arms. I believe in all of that. But we've got to do better at talking about these issues and giving emotional first aid and mental health support to people that aren't well.
My God. You know, there's so much to think about. There really is. I can see why you're involved in all of this. You know, when you started with this whole thing into where it's evolved like right now.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Well, how common is stalking at work?
Stalking is not as common as people think it is.
Okay.
It's an issue that is much more common in society, in your apartment building or your neighborhood. It's more common in terms of your social networking, where maybe you broke up with someone and they're still unhappy and they stalk you. Does it happen at work? For sure. When it does happen, employers are getting better. But an employer needs to be very careful. Typically, about roughly 94% of victims are women. So when a woman is being stalked and tells her employer, I want you to know this customer, former boyfriend, whatever, partner, husband, I saw him in the parking lot, he's come in asking for me. They'll do creative things. They may relocate her to a different site, but they need to be careful not to tell her what to do. Because I call it, that's being prescriptive. That's where the employer is saying, well, Susie, you need to get a protective order. You got to go to court. You got to
Yeah.
move into a hotel.
Yeah.
You got to be very careful not to do that. She moves into the hotel and she gets killed. Who are they going to blame?
Yep.
The employer.
Sure.
So what you want to do is be descriptive. Susie, we have a lot of options. We can talk to the police. We could work with you in the courts. We can get our employee assistance program. We can get a women's advocate group. So there are a lot of ways to help a person who's being stalked. But stalking, don't kid yourself. This is what's just chilling. Gavin de Becker probably wrote the best book on stalking called The Gift of Fear. Any woman should read The Gift of Fear after she reads my book, The Violent Person at Work. But in his research, it's really pretty stunning, and other research by others. Roughly 90% of stalkers will never physically attack their victim, whether they are male or female. They won't attack you. Their job is to completely psychologically disable you.
I believe you.
Excuse me.
I
They
do.
want you to be so fearful that you
Right.
are constantly looking over your shoulder.
Right.
That's what they want. They want you to be paranoid, and in doing so, they just sit back and they are satisfied. And so it's a crime that The courts have become much more aggressive, thank God. The prosecutions are up, thankfully. So there's just a lot of work to do.
I had something happen to me similar to that.
Did you?
A couple of years back.
How did you handle it? Can I ask you?
I tried to file a protective order, and you're right. What the whole thing was about was to just drive me crazy and get you off your game.
Yes.
Is what this is about.
Yes.
But they're afraid to do anything, but they really want to get you off your game and just drive you crazy.
Exactly.
I like to, you need to let people know that there are other people out there
Yes.
and what can be done.
And the nice news about social networking is that
Yeah.
now victims of stalking, as long as they're well vetted, are talking with one another and giving suggestions to each other.
Right.
So
It's
you could
very
have,
important.
It is. You could have somebody in Brazil giving somebody in Las Vegas or Cleveland an idea. You could have somebody
Right.
in Bangkok giving somebody in Paris an idea of here's how I dealt with my situation.
Yeah.
So as much as we knock social networking, there's actually a lot of wonderful victims units out
That's
there
true.
to support each other.
Absolutely. Wow. There's so many things to talk about, Larry. I mean, I don't know where to start. You're on call 24/7.
Yeah.
Wow. How many companies around the world?
31. I have
31.
I have 31 companies that I support.
Wow.
And I'm privileged because for many of them, I've been with them, some of them as long as 20 years, if you can imagine. So that's kind of cool because not only, that's not ego, it's just really, I'm privileged because I know their culture, their people, they
Right.
trust me, they know how I think. And it's easier than, one thing I would say to any employer is just don't call
Right.
anybody, any ex-cop who's,
No.
find somebody who understands your company and
Right.
invest the money on the prevention piece. And then you'll never have to worry about the $800 million check that was written in Las Vegas. You'll never have to worry about a jury
True.
award. Just collaborate, find whoever you want to work with, but find someone who knows the process of threat assessment,
Right.
and you'll be safer.
Wow. You, is it CVS?
CVS, yeah, we had
Yeah.
a horrible
Yeah,
situation.
that's
there.
what I want to talk to you about.
Well, CVS is
Tell me about
ongoing.
that.
Yeah, it's an ongoing situation. It's really got the whole pharmacy industry very much attuned. But a woman had, this is all according to press reports, a woman had repeatedly pleaded with her store manager and with company management for time off. And she had cardiac issues. And according to the court filings, she was working many hours a day. If I were to say 10, if I were to say 12, if I were to say 14, it's kind of like a game show. Pick how many hours she was working a day without a break.
Oh, my goodness.
So this is a horrible situation in which she eventually perished because of a heart issue, and the family has argued, CVS, you did not pay attention. This is the allegation. You did not pay attention to somebody who said, I need a break. I need a lunch hour. I need to take medication. I need to, because pharmacists, if you think about how much
Oh,
you and
yeah,
I,
they're
have you ever seen them? Have you seen
constantly-
them? I mean, I want to get my pills, and
Yeah.
these people are like totally unbelievably talented.
Right.
One mistake. Go back to It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
Remember that one pharmacist who made a mistake and the kid
That's
almost
right.
died? Okay.
That's it.
Well, now think about doing hundreds of these a day. So
goodness.
CVS now has a whole different structure.
They changed it.
Lunch hour every day for every pharmacist. Sometimes it takes a crisis for a company to go, oh, gee, yeah, maybe. So if that helps Walmart and Walgreens and lots of other chains, sometimes it takes this kind of crisis.
Sure.
But again, I come back and I hold a company responsible. If they have awareness, if somebody says, I need help, headgear, it's too noisy in here, I need a different kind of harness for the work I do, or in this case, a person with known cardiac issues who says, could you work me out and get me a break here? So CVS is in the news right now, and it's going to be a very protracted case, but it's changing in a good way. The other thing that's real interesting that you might find, I find interesting, is that we lost a lot of pharmacists in the last 2 years to suicide. It's actually one of the top 3 professions, pharmacists. Now for years, Susie, when I started teaching, the number one profession for suicide were dentists. For about 15 years.
The number one was dentist.
Number one, dentists.
Wow.
Because think about it, how many of us go into a dentist office, you're all happy, and doctor just
Not
Go to
not
town.
necessarily.
we're usually shaking.
Right.
They're invasive, they're bent over.
Right.
They know that you don't want to be in that seat.
Right.
So, but the dentist did an amazing thing, which was education. So now dentists, it depends upon the ranking, but they rank number 5 or 6. Pharmacists last year came in number 1. And physicians are number 1 or 2, depending upon the study. police officers and firefighters are number 3 or 4.
Wow.
So this is, again, evolving in terms of a profession that I was never watching. Pharmacists? Nobody was watching
No,
that.
no.
And now think about what happened with COVID,
Yes.
right?
Tell me about
Well,
that.
think about
with all the other stuff
with
that
all,
happened.
I mean, your pharmacists, in addition to
Yeah.
all that, had people yelling at them, and this, I don't want to take a vaccine. Should I take a vaccine? They had to give medical advice when they weren't really qualified to give. They had to be very cautious what they said.
Correct.
Then people get sick, and I took your stupid pill. They deal with volatile personalities and a lot of wonderful people.
Sure.
But they don't know what they're going to walk in any day.
No.
Because if you're on a psychotropic med, because you may be mentally ill,
Right.
you could say something to a pharmacist that, is she going to push that panic button and call the police? Or is that going to make it worse when the police respond?
That's right.
So it's a dicey profession, and I'm kind of immersing myself in it right now because I do have several hospitals and pharmaceutical companies that I support, and boy, they deal with a lot of crap. Just a lot of things that they're heroes. I think they're
Well,
all
yeah,
heroes. Right?
absolutely.
Nurses, our nurses, what they deal with, the way they're physically
Nurses
abused.
are amazing, aren't they?
They're verbally
Yeah.
abused,
Yeah.
physically abused. So, and our doctors. So we have a lot of work to do.
I was surprised. You go into like an emergency care, like Dignity Health. I had the option of taking somebody there a couple months ago, and I looked on the wall, and it said, "We will not put up with all these, the words and the way they're abused." I mean, I never in my life thought that somebody would do that, but there really is a lot of that out there, isn't there?
Horrible, including hate speech, racial speech,
Yeah.
LGBTQ. I mean, just horrific
Yeah.
things about, oh, you're this, oh, you're that, oh, you won't take care of me. Our medical workers, I think, are just heroes. They are absolutely unsung, just like our veterans, and our soldiers that are fighting for us every day.
Absolutely.
But when you're there, even if you're in pain, you have the worst sciatica, you have a migraine, you're pregnant, whatever it is, maybe.
Yeah.
There's no reason to subject these people to threats and to words of hate. And they have to take that home. And imagine doing that all day long, not all day long, but much of the day,
Right.
dealing with just horrible attitudes and verbiage. So I think the health community as a whole is starting to recognize this as well.
True.
Of ways to decompress, how to deal with a volatile person. I have a training program for health workers on how do you deal so that we never have that emerge, or we can try to stop it early. But what you said is really critical, that now we're telling people, if you make a threat against a healthcare worker,
That's right.
you're going to go to jail. Now, in
Yes.
my state of Florida, if you threaten a healthcare worker, you're going to go to jail. Now, you may get out, but you're not going to get out in one day or with no bond, like in some states. Some states, you make a threat against a nurse or a physician, you're out within an hour. You come to Florida and you pull that junk, not going to work.
They keep you in.
And that's what we need in this country.
Well, of course, we need that all over.
We need it for our police officers, we need it
Yes.
for our firefighters, we need it for our nurses, for our doctors, for our pharmacists. We just need to get tougher, and enough of this no bail stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's totally crazy.
What's that about?
Larry, tell me, how do you stay positive with everything going on with the COVID and
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
problems? I mean, you're right in the thick of it, if you think about
Well, I
it.
have to do kind of self-therapy, so I pray.
That's what I wanna know.
I believe in prayer,
Yeah.
so I start every day with a prayer, I end every day with a prayer. I absolutely have a wonderful family. I have a beautiful wife, 2 sons that I adore, grandchildren, so my family is a big core part of my life that I love.
That's great.
And just maybe 2 other things that are kind of, nobody would really think about this, but I'm a Frank Sinatra fanatic.
Oh, good. Me too.
I had the,
I love
I had
Frank
the privilege,
Sinatra.
including in this town, to see
Yeah.
him 3 times live. But I'm kind of a fanatic about Sinatra, anything about him. So listening to him. But the last one would be every night before I go to bed, after I pray, I watch YouTube. I watch a comedy, even like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, because I want my brain.
Change your mindset.
I want to be positive. I want to laugh. I want to watch. I watch anything from the Three Stooges to Matt Rife.
Right.
Kind of a very
Exactly.
socially
Yeah.
inappropriate comedian, or Don Rickles or whomever. But by watching happy things before you go to bed, you actually can help. And I've talked to literally neurologists about this,
Right.
and very, very people that are much smarter than I am. You can actually help your brain if you think about positivity. But if you go to bed thinking, "Oh my God, what a day," you're not going to sleep well.
No,
right?
no, but
So-
you're right. If you change your
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I believe in
It
God,
works.
I believe in music, I believe in
Absolutely.
comedy, and I believe in family.
Oh, my goodness. Well, there are so many things that I can talk to you about. I mean, it's just amazing all the things
But
you
we'll
do.
do it again.
I would love it.
Yeah.
And you, how many books have you wrote?
I've written 5 books. Yeah,
Okay.
And probably
You
about
started your first one when?
1991. My last one came out in 2022.
Okay.
And COVID had just hit. I actually called the publisher in London, and I said, this virus is getting bad. Is there
Right.
any way you can stop the press? And so thankfully, he was willing to stop it. So I needed about 3 weeks to get together research on the viruses and how people would oppose vaccines and what to expect. So it worked out very well. So yeah, 5 books along the way and about 70 journal articles in medical journals and law journals and HR journals. And
Well, you're a major speaker a lot of times too. People invite you in to speak to their companies and all
yes,
that,
very much so. Yeah.
and for training and all that.
A lot of training, a
So,
lot of
so
speeches.
what else would you like to tell our audience and tell everybody?
Stay safe, be
Yeah.
situationally aware, don't be paranoid. Don't be paranoid. The vast majority of people in your life are going to be wonderful people. The vast majority of your employees are going to be hardworking, devoted, salute the flag, retire, they're going to be wonderful. But if something, anything in your intuition says, this doesn't feel right, his comments don't, if you're into it, you were given that gift, Susie, at birth by your mom and dad. And you know what we do at work? We turn off our intuition because we got the badge,
Yeah.
we clock in, we do our job. Don't ever turn it off. Just have it a little bit on, and that would be my one suggestion. If you're aware, like we teach our kids, you're going to have a wonderful life, and that's what it is all about, having a wonderful life.
Sure. Well, Larry, if people want to find out more about you, how will they do that? You want to tell
Sure.
us?
Yeah, my website is larrybarton.com.
Okay.
So just go on there and you can send me a note directly. And
Okay.
that's probably the easiest way for anybody to reach me, and I'll do all I can. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that and then send you to the right place.
Sure. And then you're in Las Vegas, and so it has to bring back memories, though. UNLV, and I mean, did you go down and take a look?
I did. I actually did a little bit of a recording for my own clients at UNLV. I went right to Beam Hall, right where the shooting
Oh, my
occurred, and I
goodness.
said, I work right there on the 3rd floor. And so yes, when I come back here every time, I usually visit with clients or companies and people that I know and talk. And you and I have a mutual friend in Frank who brought me here, and I'm very
He's
glad he did.
wonderful,
He is
yes.
wonderful, and that's the only reason I'm doing this is to meet you and because
Yeah.
of him.
Yeah.
And but I love this city, and I think something happened with Mandalay Bay.
That's,
It woke us up.
yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
there's crime in every city every day,
Yeah.
but this one was really a game changer, right?
I don't think anybody believed it could happen, but it really did. And then the after effects of the things that happened with the people that were killed and the people that were hurt. In fact, at the time I was living over in Henderson,
Yes.
and my next door neighbor, her daughter, she had a granddaughter, and the granddaughter was supposed to go to that concert that night. And she didn't go, but her 2 friends did. Both of the friends died.
My God.
The granddaughter couldn't get over it, and she killed herself.
Yeah.
So people, there's so many things that can happen from
Yeah.
this that,
Yes.
I mean, there's just no words, is there?
No, it's residual damage. You know,
That's what you call it,
Residual damage, yeah. I think about my dad. My dad lost his arm in World War II, and that generation that came back, really, the VA didn't have PTSD. We really didn't have a diagnosis for PTSD. But if you actually look at the medical journals going back to the Civil War, in the Civil War, physicians had noticed that soldiers who had noticed carnage, somebody's
Yes.
arm was blown off or head was blown, they started to write about depressive. All right, so the whole point is you kind of fast forward now from World War II and a generation that came home that really didn't talk to their families about what they saw. Now, there's good news in this, and you just gave it as an example. That lesson that you just gave of somebody who could not come out of her trauma,
Right.
right? But there was help available. And what we need to do is to make sure that everyone who has ever seen or witnessed anything, car crash, fire victim, a drowning, it could be somebody in palliative care in a senior citizen unit,
Yeah.
or workplace violence. I've learned that one of the best things we can do is get a trauma counselor in front of that person sooner. In fact, one of the cases that I had was a woman who was murdered at work by a security guard on a Sunday afternoon, big company. And I'll tell you that what we did is within literally a day, we had trauma counselors there. Nobody saw the crime, but they knew her, they loved her, they worked with her. And people were completely at wit's end. How could this have happened? The sooner you can get in front of a qualified trauma counselor, you're more likely, you're not going to recover in a day.
No.
You're still going to have nightmares. You're going to cry. You're going to have flashbacks. But if people are taught, that's okay, but here's how we can help you. Meditation, prayer, pills, therapy, whatever works. Whatever works for you. A lot of things can happen. So lessons come out of every tragedy.
You're a very good person to talk to, and you're very knowledgeable.
Oh, thank you.
Back about 4 years ago, I had someone staying at my property, and it's something that I normally don't tell people, but I'm going to tell you, and obviously everybody else is going to know. He was staying at my property, and we were good friends. He went to see his family, and he had some major issues. And it was with COVID. So many things happened with COVID.
Sure.
where people were, tied to their home, and they couldn't go out and they couldn't do the things they wanted to do. He came back to the house, and we were all pretty well locked down then. And he started to drink. And he had a whole glass of alcohol. And he decided that, he was going to leave. And I said, well, I'm going to stay here and watch TV.
Sure.
He'd come back in later. And when he did, this was about 1:30 in the morning. And he was out on the balcony. At the time, I had lived down at Turnberry Place. And he had a couple more cans of beer there. And like I said, he had drank before. He was out there, and he wanted me to come out and talk to him on the balcony. And he had some guns in his room.
Yes.
And for some reason, God looked down on me, and he said, whatever it was, I said, I'm really tired. I said, whatever's so bad, there's nothing we can't fix in the morning. I went back to bed.
Yeah.
I laid down, and I had two dogs. I have a little toy Maltese, and I have a Westie, and they're always with me. And I laid down on the bed, and I went to sleep. And he came in to talk to me, and he said, well, if you won't come out on a balcony, you can watch me kill myself.
Oh, my God.
He stood in front of me. Both of my dogs, my Westie crawled up on my chest and laid there. I didn't know he had a gun. And he picked the gun up, and he blew his brains out.
Right in front of you.
Mm-hmm. I thought he was playing a game. I didn't think it was real till I turned the light on.
Wow.
When I turned the light on, there was blood all over. And then I had, obviously call 911 call. And it, you don't know.
To this day, it still impacts you.
Of course.
Can I ask you, were you able to see somebody fairly quickly to talk with? You don't have to answer that, but were you
I wish I could have.
Yeah.
I talked to people, but what I did is I kept trying to work through it and trying to clean up the blood and everything. And, all of a sudden you're thrust in the middle of this.
Yes.
And you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And, Frank, he was a big help to me.
Yes.
I talked to people, but it's a very scary situation.
You didn't anticipate.
No.
You didn't wake up that morning thinking this will happen.
Nobody anticipates this.
Right, right.
And it was horrendous.
I'm sorry you went through that. But can I say one thing?
Yeah.
By your telling that story, Susie, you're going to help people through this podcast.
Yeah.
You're going to help people.
Yeah.
Because I would just say, whether you talk to a rabbi, a minister, a priest, whomever, a therapist, a clinician, if we had gotten to you sooner, it doesn't mean the memory goes. The memory is never erased.
No.
Never. But what's happening right now is you're kind of like, could I have done anything differently?
That's the whole thing.
Of course, I know, because I've interviewed hundreds of victims. When my PhD, I had to interview hundreds of,
You know.
What could I have done differently?
Yep.
Whatever you could have done differently likely would not have changed the outcome.
No.
If he didn't do it that night, research is clear. he was on the path. He was on that
If I'd
pathway.
have went out on the balcony, he had an extra gun in his pocket.
You could have been a victim.
I know.
So you are a remarkable person to have lived through that, endured that, still
Yeah.
have positive energy in your
I'm
life.
very positive.
Yeah, and appreciative for
Yeah.
the things you have.
Yeah.
Right?
But talking to you, I mean, I understand so much about what you're talking about. And I hope this podcast helps people
I do
that
too.
they can see it. And again, is there anything else before we end our show?
No, I would just say to people, thank you for what you do.
Yeah.
And if they are interested, they can reach out to me at larrybarton.com, and I'll do all I can to help them. And I
Okay.
care about people, and I care about, just doing our
Yeah.
best to remain safe.
I can see that very much. Well, this is our show, folks. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Susie's Las Vegas. And this was a fantastic show, and I want to thank my guest, Dr. Larry Barton, and I hope to have him back on again. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.